The sun hung low over the New Mexico territory, painting the endless expanse of scrubland in shades of amber and crimson. Dust devils danced across the horizon like ghostly sentinels, and the only sound breaking the desert silence was the rhythmic creak of a windmill turning lazily in the evening breeze. This was 1887, and the land still bore the scars of countless conflicts between settlers, soldiers, and the Apache who had called these mountains home for generations. Samuel Sam Morrison stood on the weathered porch of his small adobe ranch house, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. At 62, his hair had turned silver white, and deep lines etched his face like the arroyos that cut through the desert floor. His blue eyes, once bright with the fire of youth, now held the quiet resignation of a man who had seen too much and lost even more. The ranch wasn't much to look at: a modest house, a small barn that leaned slightly to the east, a chicken coop, and a well that had taken him 3 months to dig by hand. His few cattle grazed in a fenced pasture where the grass grew thin and yellow. It was a humble life, but it was his, and after 30 years of drifting from town to town, job to job, Sam had finally found a place where he could rest his weary bones. He had bought the land 5 years ago with his last savings, money earned from a lifetime of breaking horses, driving cattle, and occasionally wearing a sheriff's badge in towns that paid him just enough to keep moving. The seller, a desperate homesteader named Williams, had warned him about the Apache raids that still occurred sporadically in the area, but Sam had lived through worse. He had fought in the war between the states, survived cholera outbreaks, and buried more friends than he cared to remember. A little solitude in Apache country seemed like a fair trade for peace. The isolation suited him. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the small town of Mesilla was a hard day's ride south. Sam had grown accustomed to the silence, to the way the desert spoke in whispers, the rustle of sagebrush, the distant cry of a hawk, the soft padding of coyote paws on hard-packed earth. He talked to his animals more than he had ever talked to people, and they seemed to understand him just fine. As the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, Sam noticed something unusual on the northern horizon. A thin column of smoke rose straight up in the still air, too steady and controlled to be a wildfire, too far from any known settlement to be a hearth fire. He squinted, shielding his eyes with his hand, and felt an old familiar tightness in his chest, the instinct that had kept him alive through decades of frontier life. Smoke in the desert always meant something. Sometimes it meant trouble. Sam didn't sleep well that night. He lay on his narrow cot, listening to the desert sounds and thinking about that column of smoke. In the morning, he saddled his horse, a sturdy paint mare named Sage, and rode north to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. The remains of a small Apache camp lay scattered across a shallow valley. 3 wickiups, traditional Apache dwellings made of brush and hide, had been reduced to smoldering ash. The ground was torn up by horse hooves, and dark stains in the dirt told a story Sam had seen too many times before. This hadn't been a battle. It had been a massacre. He dismounted and walked carefully through the devastation, his experienced eyes reading the signs. Cavalry horses, judging by the shoe marks. At least a dozen riders, maybe more. They had come at dawn, while the camp was sleeping, and they had shown no mercy. Empty cartridge cases glinted in the morning sun like scattered coins, but something was wrong with the scene. Sam knelt beside one of the ruined shelters and frowned. Where were the bodies? He had seen the aftermath of cavalry raids before, and the soldiers usually left the dead where they fell as a warning to other Apache. This camp had been home to at least 15 or 20 people, but he could find no sign of them. A soft sound made him freeze a whimper, so quiet he almost missed it. Sam drew his pistol and moved toward a cluster of boulders at the edge of the camp. There, huddled in a natural depression behind the rocks, he found them. 5 Apache women, ranging in age from perhaps 20 to 60, crouched together like frightened deer. Their traditional camp dresses were torn and stained with dust and blood, though none of them appeared to be seriously wounded. The oldest woman, her gray hair hanging loose around her shoulders, held a small bundle in her arms, a baby, no more than a few months old. The women looked up at Sam with eyes that held no hope, only the dull acceptance of people who had already died inside. They knew what happened to Apache captives. They knew what white men did to women and children who had nowhere to run. Sam holstered his weapon slowly and raised his hands, palms forward, in the universal gesture of peace. "Easy," he said softly, though he doubted they understood English. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." The oldest woman said something in Apache, her voice cracked and dry. Sam recognized the cadence of a prayer, or perhaps a death song. These women were preparing to die, and they wanted to do it with dignity, but Sam Morrison had buried too many innocents in his lifetime. He had seen what hatred and fear could drive men to do, and he had sworn long ago that he would never again stand by and watch the helpless suffer. Whatever had happened here, whatever had brought cavalry down on this small camp, these women and this baby had nothing to do with it. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. From his saddlebags he pulled out his water canteen and a piece of jerky. He set them on the ground between himself and the women, then backed away several steps. "Water," he said, pointing to the canteen. "Food," he gestured to his mouth. The women watched him with wary confusion. But after several minutes, the youngest, a girl barely out of her teens, crept forward and took the canteen with trembling hands. It took Sam 3 hours to coax the women out of hiding. He sat patiently in the shade of a piñon pine, occasionally offering water or food, speaking to them in the same calm voice he used with spooked horses. Gradually, their rigid fear softened into cautious curiosity. The oldest woman, who seemed to be their leader, finally approached him directly. She was small and weathered, with intelligent dark eyes and hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of hard work. When she spoke, her English was broken but clear. "You." "Not soldier," she said, studying his civilian clothes and the way he carried himself. "No," Sam replied. "Just a rancher. Sam Morrison." He touched his chest and repeated his name. The woman nodded slowly. "I am Ayanna. These are my daughters." She gestured to the others. "Daughters of my heart, not my body. The soldiers." She stopped, her face hardening with pain and anger. Sam waited. He had learned long ago that silence was often the best way to encourage someone to speak. "The soldiers came for Joaquin," Ayanna continued. "My nephew. They say he steals horses from Fort, but Joaquin has been dead 2 moons, killed by sickness in the chest." She coughed, a harsh sound that spoke of her own grief. "We try to tell them, but they do not listen. They say all Apache are liars." The story came out in fragments over the next hour. The small band had been living peacefully in the hidden valley, surviving on gathered food, small game, and the occasional trade with friendly Mexican traders. They were not warriors, they were widows and orphans, the remnants of families torn apart by years of conflict. When the cavalry had arrived looking for a horse thief named Joaquin, the women had tried to explain that he was dead, buried according to Apache custom in a cave in the mountains. The soldiers hadn't believed them. In their frustration and anger, they had decided that if they couldn't capture the thief, they would at least eliminate his potential accomplices. The women had hidden in the rocks while their makeshift village burned around them. "Where will you go?" Sam asked, when the terrible story was finished. Ayanna looked toward the mountains, then back at him. "We have no place. Our people are on reservation, far from here. We are too old, too weak to make the journey. And the soldiers." She shrugged with the fatalism of someone who had already accepted death. Sam studied the 5 women and the baby. The youngest was maybe 18, with deep brown eyes and long black hair braided with small shells. The oldest was Ayanna, perhaps 60, her face mapped with lines of sorrow and endurance. The others were in between women who had lost husbands, brothers, sons to the endless cycle of violence that plagued the territory. The baby was a boy, maybe 4 months old, with chubby cheeks and curious dark eyes that seemed too knowing for such a young face. His mother, one of the middle-aged women named Paloma, held him protectively while trying to nurse him with what little milk her malnourished body could produce. Sam made his decision quickly, the way he had learned to make all important decisions on the frontier. Thinking too long usually led to trouble. "Come with me," he said simply. "My ranch isn't much, but there's shelter, water, food." The women exchanged glances, speaking rapidly in Apache. Sam caught enough of their tone to understand they were arguing, some afraid, some hopeful, all desperate. "Why?" Ayanna asked finally. "Why would you help Apache women?" "Your people and our people. We have been enemies for many seasons." Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching the baby grab at his mother's finger with tiny, perfect hands. "Because," he said finally, "I'm tired of being enemies with anybody." The journey back to Sam's ranch took most of the day. The women walked beside his horse, carrying what few possessions they had managed to salvage from the ruins of their camp: a water basket, some tools, a few pieces of clothing. The baby rode in his mother's arms, occasionally crying from hunger or discomfort, the sound thin and heartbreaking in the vast silence of the desert. Sam found himself constantly scanning the horizon, watching for dust clouds that might indicate pursuing cavalry. He had no idea how the military would react if they discovered he was harboring Apache women. In the current political climate, with tensions running high between settlers and the various Apache bands, his actions could easily be interpreted as treason or collaboration with the enemy. But as he watched Ayanna help the youngest woman, Ciala, across a particularly rocky stretch of ground, he felt no regret. These were not warriors or raiders. They were simply human beings who had lost everything and needed help to survive. When they finally reached his modest ranch as the sun was setting, the women stood uncertainly at the edge of his property, as if afraid to cross some invisible boundary. Sam dismounted and gestured toward his house. "It's not much," he said, "but you're welcome to it." Ayanna approached the small adobe building with the cautious reverence of someone entering a sacred space. She ran her weathered hands over the sun-warmed walls and nodded approvingly. "Good house," she said. "Strong. It will last." Sam showed them the well, the chicken coop, the small garden where he grew beans and corn and squash. The women examined everything with professional interest, pointing out improvements that could be made, plants that might grow better with different care. Despite their recent trauma, they were already thinking about survival, about making this strange new place into something resembling home. That first evening was awkward but not unpleasant. Sam cooked beans and cornbread over his small fire while the women sat in a circle, speaking quietly in Apache and taking turns holding the baby. The child seemed healthier already, though still thin from his mother's inadequate milk supply. After dinner, Ayanna approached Sam with formal dignity. "We will work," she announced. "We are not beggars. We will earn our place here." Sam nodded, understanding the importance of pride in survival. "There's plenty that needs doing," he admitted. "Garden's been suffering from my poor attention. Chickens could use better care. And I never was much of a cook." A ghost of a smile crossed Ayanna's weathered face. "This, we can fix." That night Sam gave up his bed to Paloma and the baby, spreading his own blankets on the floor of the main room. The other women made sleeping spaces in the corner, using their few remaining possessions as pillows and covers. As he lay awake listening to their quiet breathing, Sam realized that his house had never felt more like a home. In the morning, he woke to the sound of industry. The women were already up, moving around his property with the efficiency of people who understood work as a form of prayer. Ciala was feeding his chickens and gathering eggs. Two of the middle-aged women, Nayeli and Itzel, were working in his neglected garden, their hands dark with rich soil. Ayanna was grinding corn in a stone metate she had somehow produced from her meager belongings, while Paloma nursed her baby in the morning shade of the house. For the first time in years, Sam's ranch felt truly alive. 3 weeks passed in surprising harmony. The women transformed Sam's modest homestead with quiet efficiency, bringing feminine wisdom and Apache knowledge to the harsh realities of desert life. Ayanna proved to be an expert in desert plants, showing Sam which cacti produced edible fruit, which roots could be ground into flour during lean times, and which herbs could treat everything from fever to infected wounds. Nayeli and Itzel worked miracles in his struggling garden, introducing traditional Apache agricultural techniques that made his corn grow taller and his beans more abundant. They built clever irrigation channels that conserved water, and they planted native plants around the house that would attract beneficial insects while deterring harmful ones. Ciala, the youngest, had a natural gift with animals. Under her care, Sam's chickens began producing twice as many eggs, and his cattle grew fat and healthy on her knowledge of which grasses were most nutritious. She also revealed herself to be a skilled hunter, providing rabbit and quail to supplement their diet. Paloma, when not caring for her baby, proved to be an exceptional cook and healer. She prepared meals that were not only delicious but also perfectly suited to the desert climate, keeping everyone healthy and strong. Her baby, whom she called Little Wolf, grew plump and happy under the improved conditions. Sam found himself learning as much as teaching. The women showed him how to make adobe bricks that would last for generations, how to preserve meat in the dry desert air, and how to read the subtle signs that predicted weather changes days in advance. In return, he shared his knowledge of cattle ranching, his mechanical skills with windmills and fences, and his connections with the few traders and neighbors who occasionally passed through the area. but their peaceful existence was always shadowed by the knowledge that they were living on borrowed time. Cavalry patrols occasionally passed within sight of the ranch, and Sam would order the women to stay inside while he dealt with any soldiers who stopped for water or information. So far, none had shown more than casual interest in his property, but everyone understood that discovery could mean disaster. It was during the 4th week that their fragile security began to unravel. Sam was repairing a section of fence when he spotted a dust cloud approaching from the south. His heart sank as he recognized the military formation of mounted soldiers, riding in disciplined columns with their brass buttons glinting in the afternoon sun. This wasn't a casual patrol, this was a deliberate search party, he quickly signaled to the women, who had developed their own system of warnings over the past weeks. Within minutes, they had vanished into the root cellar he had dug beneath his house, taking the baby with them. From the outside, his ranch looked exactly as it had before their arrival. A simple bachelor's homestead with no sign of female inhabitants. The cavalry unit consisted of 12 men led by a young lieutenant with pale skin that had been burned red by the desert sun. His uniform was dusty but pressed, and his eyes held the zealous intensity of an officer determined to make his reputation through successful Indian fighting. "Good afternoon, sir," the lieutenant called out as he dismounted. "I'm Lieutenant Hayes, United States Cavalry. We're conducting a search of this area for Apache fugitives." Sam leaned against his fence post and nodded casually. "Afternoon, Lieutenant. Sam Morrison. Haven't seen any Apache around here lately. Mostly just me and my animals." Hayes studied the ranch with sharp, suspicious eyes. "We have reports of Apache movement in this area. 5 women and a child, possibly the survivors of a camp we pacified several weeks ago." The word pacified made Sam's jaw clench, but he kept his voice level. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone. Been pretty quiet out here." The lieutenant walked closer, his hand resting casually on his pistol grip. "You don't mind if we search your property, do you, Mr. Morrison? Just to be thorough." It wasn't really a question, and Sam knew it. "Help yourself," he said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. The search was methodical and thorough. Hayes divided his men into teams that examined every building, every possible hiding place on Sam's small ranch. They poked through his barn, checked the chicken coop, and even peered down his well. Sam watched with growing anxiety as they moved closer and closer to the house, where the secret entrance to the root cellar lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The women had practiced this drill many times, and Sam knew they could remain silent and motionless for hours if necessary. But little Wolf was still a baby, and babies had their own schedules for crying, eating, and making noise. If he chose this moment to fuss, "Nice little place you have here," Hayes commented, running his finger along the adobe wall of the house. "Looks like you've made some improvements recently." "This garden is pretty well tended for a bachelor's plot," Sam shrugged. "Been having more time on my hands lately. Figured I might as well make the place livable." Hayes gestured to 2 of his soldiers. "Check inside the house, boys. Look for any signs of recent occupation by multiple people." The soldiers disappeared into Sam's modest home, and he heard them moving around inside, opening drawers, checking closets, examining everything for evidence of female inhabitants. His heart pounded as he heard their boots walking directly over the hidden cellar entrance. Meanwhile, Hayes continued his casual interrogation. "You know, Mr. Morrison, harboring Apache fugitives is a serious crime. Could get a man hanged, depending on the circumstances." "Good thing I'm not harboring anybody then," Sam replied. "Good thing indeed." Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because we've been tracking these particular Apache for weeks now. They killed some of our men, you see, ambushed a patrol and made off with military supplies." Sam kept his face carefully neutral, but inside he felt a surge of anger. Ayanna had told him the truth about her nephew Joaquin. He had been dead for months, killed by tuberculosis. These women were guilty of nothing more than being Apache at a time when their people were considered enemies of the state. The soldiers emerged from the house, shaking their heads. "Nothing suspicious, Lieutenant," one reported. "Just typical bachelor's quarters. No sign of women or children." Hayes nodded slowly, but Sam could see he wasn't satisfied. The young officer was clearly intelligent and experienced, and something about the ranch bothered him. "Tell me, Mr. Morrison," Hayes said conversationally, "where did you serve during the war?" The question caught Sam off guard. "3rd Indiana Infantry," he answered automatically. "Why? Just curious. I always like to meet fellow veterans." Hayes smiled again. "I served with the 5th Massachusetts myself. saw action at Antietam and Gettysburg. You develop certain instincts in combat, don't you? About when people are telling you the truth. Sam met his gaze steadily. I reckon so. The thing is, Mr. Morrison, my instincts are telling me that you're lying to me about something. And in my experience, when civilians lie to cavalry officers about Apache, it usually means someone's about to get killed. Before Sam could respond, a thin cry echoed from somewhere beneath their feet. It was muffled and distant, but unmistakably the sound of an infant in distress. Hayes's eyes went wide, and his hand moved to his sidearm. Well, the lieutenant said softly. It seems we've found them after all. The silence that followed Little Wolf's cry stretched like a taut wire between Sam and the cavalry officer. Hayes's men had heard it too, and they were already spreading out in a circle around the house, their weapons drawn and ready. Sam felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same deadly quiet he had experienced in the moments before battle during the war. I don't suppose you'd care to explain that baby's cry, Mr. Morrison? Hayes asked, his voice deceptively mild. Sam considered his options. He could claim ignorance, but Hayes wasn't a fool. He could try to fight, but 12 armed soldiers against one aging rancher were impossible odds. Or he could tell the truth and hope that somewhere beneath the lieutenant's military bearing was a decent human being. They're not warriors, Lieutenant, Sam said quietly. They're widows and orphans, survivors of the camp you destroyed 3 weeks ago. Hayes's expression hardened. The camp where our soldiers were killed, the camp where innocent people were massacred while you were looking for a man who was already dead. Sam corrected. Joaquin died of tuberculosis 2 months ago. These women tried to tell your boys that, but nobody bothered to listen. You're calling United States cavalry officers liars, Mr. Morrison. I'm calling them men who were so eager to get blood on their hands that they didn't care whose blood it was. The two men stared at each other while Hayes's soldiers waited for orders. Sam could see the conflict in the young officer's eyes, duty warring against doubt, military protocol battling against human conscience. Even if what you're saying is true, Hayes said finally, it doesn't matter now. These Apache are fugitives from justice. It's my duty to bring them back to stand trial. Trial for what? Being Apache? Being in the wrong place when angry soldiers came looking for revenge? For being enemy combatants in time of war? That baby down there is 4 months old. You think he's an enemy combatant? Hayes flinched slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. Sergeant Miller, he called to his senior non-commissioned officer, secure the house and find that cellar entrance. Sam stepped between the soldiers and his home. You'll have to go through me first. That can be arranged, Hayes said coldly, drawing his pistol. But before anyone could move, Ayanna emerged from the house. She walked out slowly, her hands raised in surrender, her gray hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Behind her came the other women, each walking with the dignity of queens going to their execution. Paloma carried Little Wolf, who had stopped crying and was staring around with wide, curious eyes. Enough, Ayanna said in her careful English. No more hiding, no more running. She approached Hayes with the same calm courage Sam had seen her display since the first day they met. I am Ayanna, daughter of Cochise, grandmother to these women. If you seek Apache to punish, then take me. But leave the young ones alone. Leave the baby alone. Hayes stared at her, clearly struggling with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. This wasn't the savage warrior he had been trained to capture. This was an elderly woman who reminded him, perhaps, of his own grandmother. Ma'am, he said, his voice softer than before. I have orders to bring back all Apache fugitives, and I am telling you that we are not fugitives. We are refugees. Ayanna's dark eyes met his without fear. You burned our homes. You scattered our families. You killed our men and our children. What crime is it to run from such things? What crime is it to want to live? Sam watched the young officer's face and saw the exact moment when his certainty began to crack. Hayes had probably never spoken directly to an Apache before, certainly not an elderly woman who spoke with such quiet dignity. The propaganda that portrayed all Apache as bloodthirsty savages was harder to maintain when faced with the reality of Ayanna's grief and grace. Lieutenant, Sergeant Miller said quietly. What are your orders? Hayes holstered his pistol and walked closer to the little group of women. He studied each face carefully, and Sam could see him registering their ages, their obvious exhaustion, the baby's innocent vulnerability. Tell me about Joaquin, Hayes said finally. Ayanna's story took nearly an hour to tell, and Hayes listened to every word. She spoke of her nephew's life as a peaceful man who had worked as a guide for Mexican traders, of his slow death from the lung sickness that claimed so many Apache in the reservation camps, of the small ceremony where they had buried him in a mountain cave according to the old traditions. She told of the morning when the soldiers had come, demanding to know Joaquin's whereabouts, refusing to believe that he was dead. She described the terror of hiding in the rocks while their village burned, the desperate flight across the desert, the kindness of the white man who had found them and offered shelter. "We are not your enemies," she concluded. "We are simply Apache women trying to live until tomorrow." Hayes had grown increasingly uncomfortable during the recitation. When Ayanna finished, he turned to Sam. "Is all this true?" "Every word," Sam confirmed. "You can see their burial cave if you want. About 2 miles north, up in the Red Rocks. Joaquin's body is still there, along with his personal effects." The lieutenant looked around at his men, then back at the women. The righteous anger that had driven him to hunt these fugitives was rapidly being replaced by something much more complex and troubling. "Sergeant Miller," he said finally, "take 2 men and check out this burial site. I want to verify their story." While the soldiers were gone, an uneasy truce settled over the ranch. Hayes's remaining men kept their weapons ready but didn't point them at anyone. The Apache women sat quietly in the shade of Sam's house, Paloma nursing Little Wolf while the others waited with the patience of people who had learned to accept whatever fate brought them. Sam offered water to the soldiers, and Hayes accepted a cup gratefully. "This country is hell on horses and men alike," the lieutenant observed. "It can be," Sam agreed, "but it has its own beauty if you learn to see it. You've been out here long? 5 years on this ranch. 30 years in the territory altogether." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "You've seen it all then. The wars, the raids, the settlements. What do you think is the answer to the Apache problem?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching Ciala gently stroke one of his horses. "I think maybe we're asking the wrong question," he said finally. "Maybe instead of asking how to solve the Apache problem, we should be asking how to solve the people problem." "What do you mean?" "I mean people are people, Lieutenant. Apache, Mexican, white, we all want the same basic things. Food, shelter, safety for our families, a chance to live in peace." Sam gestured toward the women. "Look at them. Really look at them. Do they look like the enemy to you?" Before Hayes could answer, Sergeant Miller returned with his detail. The older soldier approached the lieutenant and spoke quietly, but Sam caught enough to understand that they had found Joaquin's burial cave exactly as Ayanna had described it. Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, Sam could see that something fundamental had changed in the young officer's worldview. "Ma'am," Hayes said to Ayanna, "I owe you an apology. It appears that you were telling the truth about your nephew, and that means—" He swallowed hard. "That means we made a terrible mistake that day at your camp." Ayanna nodded gravely. "Mistakes happen in war. The question is what we do when we discover them." Hayes looked around at his men, then at Sam, then back at the women. Sam could see him weighing duty against conscience, military regulations against human decency. It was a choice that would define the kind of man he was going to become. "Officially," Hayes said slowly, "this patrol found no trace of Apache fugitives in this area. Officially, our search was unsuccessful, and we are returning to the fort to report that the suspects have escaped into Mexico." Sam felt a surge of relief, but Ayanna's expression remained cautious. "And unofficially?" Hayes managed a small smile. "Unofficially, I suggest you keep a low profile for a while. There are other officers at the fort who might not be as reasonable as I'm choosing to be today." The cavalry patrol rode away into the gathering dusk, leaving behind a silence that felt different from the desert quiet Sam had grown accustomed to. This was the silence of a crisis survived, of a future that suddenly seemed possible again. That evening, the women prepared a feast to celebrate their deliverance. Paloma had been saving small portions of precious ingredients for weeks, and now she combined them into a meal that filled Sam's modest house with aromas he had never experienced. There were corn cakes made with wild honey, roasted rabbit seasoned with desert herbs, and a stew thick with beans and squash and mysterious flavors that seemed to capture the essence of the land itself. As they ate by lamplight, Ayanna raised a cup of water in a toast. "To Sam Morrison," she said solemnly, "who risked his life for strangers. In Apache tradition, such a man becomes family." Sam felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be part of something larger than his own survival. "I'm honored," he managed to say, but Ayanna wasn't finished. "And, to Lieutenant Hayes," she added, who chose to see with his heart instead of his orders. May his conscience bring him peace. They drank to that as well, and Sam found himself hoping that the young officer would indeed find peace with his decision. Hayes had made a choice that could end his military career if it were ever discovered, but he had also made a choice that would let him sleep at night for the rest of his life. In the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The women continued to improve and expand everything they touched, but now they worked with the confidence of people who knew they were building something permanent. Nayeli and Itzel established a trading relationship with Mexican merchants who traveled the old Spanish trails, exchanging Apache crafts and medicinal herbs for tools and supplies that couldn't be made or found locally. Ciala proved to have a remarkable gift with horses, and word of her skill began to spread among the scattered ranchers and traders of the territory. Men would ride 50 miles to have her train their mounts or treat their injuries, paying with gold or goods or sometimes just with the promise of friendship in a land where allies were precious. Paloma's healing knowledge made her invaluable to the small community that gradually formed around Sam's ranch. She could treat everything from broken bones to difficult births, and her reputation as a curandera grew throughout the region. Little Wolf thrived under the improved conditions, becoming a fat, happy baby who charmed everyone who met him. Ayana, meanwhile, became the unofficial diplomat and wisdom keeper of their small family. When disputes arose between neighbors or when travelers needed guidance through the dangerous country, they came to her for advice. Her age and experience, combined with her deep understanding of both Apache and white cultures, made her uniquely qualified to help people bridge the gaps between worlds. And Sam found himself changing as well. The loneliness that had driven him to isolation began to heal in the warmth of genuine companionship. He discovered that he had skills as a teacher and protector that he had never had the chance to develop. The women looked to him for guidance on dealing with the white world, while he learned from them about living in harmony with the harsh but beautiful desert environment. But the most profound change was in his sense of purpose. For years, Sam had been drifting through life without direction, surviving but not really living. Now he woke each morning with a sense of responsibility and connection that gave weight and meaning to every day. One evening, as they all sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Ayana spoke what they were all thinking. "This is good," she said simply. "This feels like home." Sam nodded, understanding that home had never been about the place. It had always been about the people. 2 years later, Sam's modest ranch had grown into something none of them could have imagined. What had started as a simple homestead had become the heart of a small but thriving community. The original adobe house had been expanded with additional rooms and a larger kitchen. New buildings dotted the property, a proper clinic where Paloma practiced her healing arts, workshops where the women created beautiful crafts for trade, and guest quarters for the steady stream of visitors who came seeking their various services. Little Wolf, now a sturdy toddler with bright eyes and an infectious laugh, was learning to walk by chasing chickens around the yard. He spoke both Apache and English with equal fluency, and his presence had softened even the hardest hearts among the occasional white visitors who had been suspicious of Apache inhabitants. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed by the territorial authorities. Governor Ross had visited the previous spring, officially to inspect the region but actually to see for himself this unusual settlement where Apache and whites lived in harmony. He had left impressed and had quietly spread word that Sam Morrison's ranch was to be considered a model of peaceful coexistence rather than a problem to be solved. Lieutenant Hayes, now promoted to captain, had become a regular visitor and unofficial protector of the community. His report on the failed search for Apache fugitives had been accepted without question, and his growing reputation as an officer who could work with, rather than against the native population, had led to several commendations. He had even begun courting Ciala, though their relationship progressed with the careful formality appropriate to crossing cultural boundaries. But perhaps the most significant change was in the people themselves. Sam had filled out and gained color, his silver hair now matched by a full beard that made him look like a benevolent patriarch. The lines in his face had softened from marks of hardship into marks of character, and his eyes held the contentment of a man who had finally found his place in the world. The women had blossomed as well. Ayana, though now in her mid-60s, carried herself with the dignity of a respected elder and wise woman. Her counsel was sought by people from dozens of miles around, and she had become something of a legend in the territory, the Apache grandmother who had helped build a bridge between two worlds. Nayeli and Itzel had established what was essentially the region's first successful trading post. Their network of Mexican, Apache, and Anglo contacts, making them wealthy by frontier standards. They used their prosperity to help other displaced Apache families find safety and stability, quietly creating an underground railroad for refugees from the harsh reservation system. Ciala had married Captain Hayes in a ceremony that blended Apache and Christian traditions, becoming the first Apache woman in the territory to marry a U.S. Army officer with full military approval. Their wedding had been attended by dignitaries from Santa Fe and had been written about in newspapers as far away as Denver and San Francisco. Paloma had become the most respected healer in southern New Mexico, her clinic serving patients of all races and backgrounds. Her medical knowledge had even attracted the attention of Army doctors, who came to learn her techniques for treating desert ailments and battlefield injuries. And Little Wolf, now called William by his Anglo friends and still Wolf by his Apache family, represented something entirely new, a child growing up without the burden of racial hatred, equally comfortable in both worlds and accepted by both communities. On this particular evening in late summer of 1889, the extended family gathered on the porch as they did every night, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. Sam held William on his lap while the boy chattered in his mixture of English and Apache, pointing at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Tell me the story, Grandfather Sam," William demanded, using the title that came naturally to him despite their lack of blood relation. "Tell me about the day the ladies came." Sam smiled and settled the boy more comfortably. This had become a favorite bedtime story, though Sam was careful to leave out the more frightening details for his young audience. "Well," Sam began in his storytelling voice, "it was a hot day in the desert and I was just a lonely old cowboy living all by himself." As he spoke, Sam caught Ayana's eye across the porch. She smiled at him with the warmth of deep friendship and shared memories. In her expression, he could see the same gratitude and wonder that he felt himself, amazement that a simple act of kindness could have grown into something so rich and meaningful. The story had become their origin myth, the foundation tale of their chosen family. But Sam knew that the real story wasn't about the day 5 desperate women had begged for shelter. The real story was about what happened next, the daily choice to care for each other, to build something better than what they had found, to prove that people of different backgrounds could not only coexist, but thrive together. As the stars emerged fully and William fell asleep in his arms, Sam realized that he had finally found the answer to the question that had driven him to this remote corner of New Mexico territory. He had come here looking for peace and solitude, thinking that happiness meant being left alone. Instead, he had discovered that happiness meant never being alone again. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwood trees that Nayeli and Itzel had planted around the house, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Sam Morrison, surrounded by the family he had never expected to find, felt the deep contentment of a man who had lived to see his greatest gamble pay off beyond his wildest dreams. The 5 Apache widows who had begged for shelter had given him far more than he had given them. They had given him a reason to wake up each morning, a purpose for his remaining years, and a legacy that would outlast any monument built of stone. In the growing darkness of the New Mexico night, with his chosen family safe around him and a child's peaceful breathing in his ear, Sam Morrison finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy, and he knew that no matter what tomorrow might bring, tonight they were all exactly where they belonged. The end.